What an amazing day. What a gorgeous weather, right? I think we were all watching the sky, so we're going to stay on top of that. But I love the number of young readers I'm seeing in the audience today. And the thing I want to say to all of you is, yes, all of those bona fides are absolutely true. But I think the reason I am so excited to be moderating this panel with these incredibly talented writers is that my mom is a retired middle school English teacher. These stories at this moment in a child's reading and development are so crucial and fun, right? Immersive. I had an experience reading a book, actually it was Rougarou Magic, that made me feel 10 again, right? That is what books do. That is the transportative power of what we witness at Bookfest. So again, I am so grateful to have the opportunity to be in conversation with all of you, and I am excited for your insights around this. We're also going to bake in some time if we do have any questions from our young readers or others, so don't be shy, right? Like some of the heroes in some of these stories, I encourage all of you to think adventurously, right? To take the risk and ask the question. But I'm going to get us started today with a little bit of a, I'm interested in how do you create characters that feel honest and engaging, not just to middle grade readers, but broadly. How do you approach that task of bringing people on the page to life?
I know, so, there we go. Oh, too much? Okay, I think, we're middle, we're there? Yes, okay, awesome. So I'm gonna go back 2 steps. Hi. So you can totally be shy. Everybody can be shy, but being shy doesn't stop you from asking questions, right? So it's okay. If you're a shy human, that's just how it rolls. But you also can ask your question. That's cool. Okay, so now back to people. How do you put people on the page? Honestly, you guys, that is the hardest thing ever, because people have 1 bajillion dimensions to them, and maybe on page you can get 3. So you have to work really hard to pick the right 3 so that it's just enough that, and here's the thing that people definitely do not always tell you, the writer is only putting 3, you put the rest. Okay, because you can only fit so much. It's a paper, it's flat. You fill in the rest of it. And so then for me, what I do is, I was a classroom teacher for 13 years. I taught elementary school. I absolutely love, no shade to any of the other grades. 5th grade is my grade. It's okay, but everybody else is cool too. No shade. Okay, everybody else is cool too, but 5th grade is my favorite. But over the 13 years that I taught elementary school, I got to meet a lot of kids, and I got to spend a lot of time hanging out with a lot of kids. And so literally it's such a cheat. Every time I'm writing, I use a real person, but because it's only 3 parts of them, they don't always notice that it's some. Sometimes they do though. So one time, but I have them read, and if they go, oh my gosh, that feels a lot like me, I'm it is, that's because it is you. But if they don't say, then I just let it roll, because maybe there's something in that character that they're still working, you know what I mean? They're not ready to face it. I'm not gonna push you into it, but from there. So for me, it's always about people. I'm always writing books with a very specific child in mind, even if it's me or one of my kids. I have a very specific child in mind. And I say this about my own kids all the time, and I've said it many places, including on camera, hello camera, which is that my kids are awesome. They are super special, but they're not that special. So if I can write something that one of them would like, then that means that a lot of other kids on the planet will also like that book too, and maybe need the book in their lives. So that's the way that I approach it. Does that answer your question?
Yes, and I loved the answer.
Okay.
Yeah, so like Marty, I also based my protagonist, Feliciana, on a real person, and that real person is me. Or a really specific...
The best of all the real people.
Oh, thank you. But like Marty was saying, a specific part of me from a specific time of my life. So The plot of this book is that it's about a Cajun kid who moves up to Boston and she's having a tough time, so her grandma sends a rougarou, which is a swamp monster from Cajun folklore, to help her out. And as you might have heard in my bio, I also moved to Boston, and like Feliciana, it was not a good move for me. And while my grandmother unfortunately did not send me a rougarou, she's 97, she's still down in Homa, the feelings that Feliciana was going through of missing home and missing her community, and eventually realizing though that her Cajun heritage and Louisiana heritage is actually like really cool. That was, real feelings that I went through while I was up there. So I think you can never capture everyone's experience, but I was hoping that if I captured my own experience really, really well, it would nonetheless feel very believable and tangible. And at least for Lindsay, that seems to have worked. So happy to hear that.
I found it utterly compelling. And I think it is partially the way you capture that experience of moving from a familiar place, right, to an unfamiliar one, and all of the challenges around that. So no, it leapt off the page to me. Can't encourage you enough to read it. My second question is, what choices do you make in terms of style? Tone, pacing, structure, when you're writing for this age group? And is it something that you center when you work in this?
No, absolutely. So the natural narrator voice in my head, you guys all have natural narrator voices in your head, right? Like you have people who narrate your life in your, yeah. I thought, because I felt like a kinship, But so the natural narrator in my head is like an old British dude. No joke. Right? You can tell the kind of stuff I read when I was young, but an old British dude. So then I get to have fun, but very few of my books are actually narrated by old British dudes. So I get to have fun imagining who the narrator is in somebody else's head, like who's telling those stories. And so then that is when I'm thinking about the human that I'm writing for and the human that I'm writing, I really meditate on, like try to get in their shoes and think, what is the person narrating their life actually sounds like? And that actually super helps to structure the book itself. So then I have lots of different kinds of books that are for all different kinds of people, and yet at the same time for everybody. Because as y'all know Sandra Cisneros, if you don't, go look her up right now. She's amazing. Okay. Yes. But she has a vignette called 10. And in the vignette called 10, it is the character's 10th birthday, and she talks about how it feels to be 10, that it's like pennies in a box, all the ages rattling around inside of you. She's 10, but she's also 9 and 8 and 7 and 6, and that is exactly how I feel, and that's exactly how all of it is. It's just fact. We're just gonna take Sandra Cisneros' fact. It's fact for everybody. So even if I have written the book with an 8-year-old person in mind, if you are older than that, you still have your 8-year-old inside of you, so then you can also enjoy those books as well.
Love that answer. And I do love 10 as vignette too.
I would say style, like consciously thinking about style, a lot of times comes later in the process for me. A lot of times first draft decisions are vibes, and then later I decide whether those vibes are working. I would say the biggest conscious style choice I made in Rougarou Magic was keeping it in third person. When we were trying to sell the book to publishers, it did not sell on the first round, and so my agent and I were going back and forth. What are changes? A lot of the feedback we got was people saying they weren't connecting with my protagonist right off the bat, so we thought, well, let's try it in first. Let's take away some of that distance. Let's see what happens. And it did not work at all. Like I mentioned, my protagonist is going through a really tough time. And when you're describing someone else going through a really tough time, that is a little more bearable maybe than hearing a 12-year-old in her own words, like feeling really bad about herself and her family and where she's from. And I made it through like half of a chapter and was like, you know what, this is horrible, this is so sad, this isn't gonna work. So it turned out that my original vibes had been correct, and now I had a reason to back them up. But sometimes just experimenting with different styles is, I guess, the best way to figure out what's gonna work for you and your story you're trying to tell. My next book that's in the works is in first person, but that protagonist is a lot more self-assured and wants to tell you what's going on. So it made a lot more sense for a different character and a different story to have that story told a different way.
No, that's so amazing, and it's making me think about my internal narrator is always talking in the third person, and I think it allows me to have a little bit of a divide and humor on situations. So thank you so much for those insights, team. Why do you believe middle grade stories are important? And what do you hope your work gives to readers at that stage in life?
So I feel like in my experience, middle school was the worst time of life, but with the best books. It's a really difficult phase where you're like changing a lot as a person, and also your brain is in a stage where it feels like everyone is looking at you and paying attention to you all the time. So not only do you not know what you're doing, at least I didn't, but it felt like everyone was lasered in on me. So did not enjoy being a fifth grader or a sixth grader like my character. But the books at that time are, and remain to this day, some of my favorite books that I've ever read. And so I guess if I can continue to put those really good books as a bright spot during a tough time, then I feel really lucky to be able to do that. And I hope other people find that our books are among some of their lifelong faves.
I mean, if you just have a one or two people, then it makes it worth it. So like, but you're gonna have so many more. So then that'll be good. So for me, middle grade as a genre is really interesting because it always existed, but it didn't exist, right? Until decently recently. Like we didn't used to segregate them in that way. And so then we're sort of making it up as we go. So then you just have to take whatever I'm saying as fact, because it's as good a fact as anybody else's facts are gonna be right now about the middle grade. Okay, excellent. So we're all together on that, wonderful. So the thing that I feel makes middle grade different from YA is that YA is often about the person finding their power and trying to change the world, right? Like they're like, oh, I wanna fix everything out there. But I think that we don't, as a society, get enough time to think about how we grow and change and save ourselves. And middle grade, really, like in that you get to do that. Okay, now that's the grown-up answer. The real answer is that I still believe in magic. And so I love getting to tuck it into little corners because as an adult, I still see it all around me everywhere that I go. It feels very real to me. And so then I love being able to fold it into very real situations in stories, including finding a super cool mailbox in the woods that will bend space-time, you're welcome, and send a letter to any woman in history that you might need to get a little bit of advice from, like as you go. So then, like that is mostly life, but then, you know, a touch of more. Maybe possible someday. Not directly at the moment, unless one of y'all is holding out on me. But you know, let me know afterwards, and we'll go there.
So that's a perfect seg into I have a specific question for every author. And then in a minute, I'm going to make sure that all of you, if, again, you have questions, and shy questions are absolutely as valid as loud questions, but these are the questions I had coming out. And Marti, okay. I've got to say that magic that you described that you feel, it comes really authentically off the page. And in Nina and the Mysterious Mailbox, your protagonist embarks on a journey that is sparked by an unexpected letter. How do you craft mysteries that are engaging? Because those are, I find it to be actually one of the most challenging, like as a reader, and I eat books, right? I'm a librarian. Mysteries are tough, so I was very impressed.
Tough. So this is actually my first mystery. I'm in line edits for the second book in this series, which is also has sort of a mystery structure to it. I think that I was able to do it by not thinking of it as a mystery because, right. So then if you're thinking of it as a mystery, then you're thinking ahead of time, okay, there've got to be clues. I got to bury it in this place. I feel like it feels super artificial. Yeah. What I did instead is to really sink myself into the place of the protagonist. Her name is Nina. There she is on the cover, and she has some friends, and she has some problems. She's just started middle school. Her friend, former best friend, Zoe, is not speaking to her day one, right? We got problems. We got real life problems. But so then what happens is that as she's trying to solve the problems of her life, those problems help to unfold the rest of the mystery. So then, she's working things, and it's helping things to unfold in that way. So then, I think for me that works really well. I'll give some other advice so apparently Agatha Christie never knew who done it. So if you're writing, everybody's got a different method, right? So she wrote it so that anybody could have done it, and then she's like, surprise, this person done it. Let me go shore up a couple of things and we're good from there, right? So there's lots of different ways to go about it. Mine is not the only one. Does that answer your question?
Marty, I loved that. And I had no idea about Agatha Christie. I've got to go back and do some rereading.
Some rereading. It's fun. Yeah.
Incredible. So then, Rachel, Rougarou Magic, and Rougarous generally, right? It is I'm a recent New Orleans arrival. I've been here 2 years. Discovering the Rougarou was one of the greatest things. So how do you adapt this sort of cultural myth, and then you're moving into Boston, right, for a middle grade audience, ensuring that authenticity while also providing all this amazing context about our beautiful city and region?
Yeah. So having the Rougarou be appropriate for middle schoolers is really not about the middle schoolers. It's more about convincing, I guess, their parents, which is kind of funny, right? Because Rougarou stories historically have been told by parents to children to make them behave and go to sleep on time. Your classic Rougarou story was, if you don't behave, if you don't go to bed, if you don't go to church, etc., the Rougarou is going to get you. And for a long time, that's what the stories were, and parents were cool with that. But now I think people have maybe gotten a little more protective about not wanting to scare their kids with the boogeyman, which is probably good. So that's, the Rougarou is going to come eat you. I don't think I hope not, my readers aren't having nightmares from that. But the other adaptation that I was making with the Rougarou is that it is historically that scary figure, and I wanted, in portraying Louisiana and Cajun folklore, I wanted a more positive and less terrifying portrayal, because the Rougarou kind of functions in the book as a bit of a metaphor, and if that sounds boring, it's a really cute, fun metaphor. He's a great character still, but the Rougarou is kind of a metaphor for Feliciana's Cajun and Louisiana heritage. She is trying to hide this part about herself because she has a bully who makes fun of her for it, and it makes it really hard to hide when you have a literal manifestation of your Cajun and Louisiana heritage following you to school in the form of an enormous, giant, magical wolf. So that was more of the adaptation that I thought a lot about, was how do I take this creature that's historically very menacing and instead make it a representation of all the loving and wonderful things about Louisiana. And as for adapting it to Boston, Boston actually has a lot of swamps, so a Rougarou might be quite at home there. And I also, partially because I was living it, wanted to give a portrayal of Cajun culture outside of Louisiana. We don't see that portrayed basically ever. All portrayals of Cajuns are old men on the swamp, but that wasn't my experience. I have, 20-something cousins, and probably half of them have moved outside of Louisiana. So, what does this culture look like if it's not an old man on the bayou? That was also really important to me in bringing the Rougarou up north.
I thought you did a beautiful job.
Thank you.
Rachel and Marty, thank you so much for answering my questions. I've got about, and again, we're going to try to keep this to time, but we have a little bit of time on the tail end. I just want to take a pause. Does anyone have a question from the audience? Yes, indeed. And can you come up for us really quick? We only have these microphones, so if you come up, I can either repeat it or here we go.
We can say it louder.
What was your favorite character that you created in one of your books?
Oh my gosh, I love this question and I have an instant answer. Okay, so I have a book, it's a series about a girl who lives in New Orleans who has a wild backyard, you know, the kind of like where you don't cut it half the summer and then like you go out there, and, oh, hello. You go out there and then, right, okay. And in her backyard, she finds a chrysalis.
Whoa.
But instead of incubating a butterfly, as a chrysalis ought to do, it incubates a dragon. And she brings back a new age of dragons. And so that first dragon, Jupiter Storm, favorite character ever. He's the best. He's the most dope.
That sounds like an incredible character. I think I saw another question.
If you were a 7-year-old, put your mind back into your body, what do you do as a 7-year-old, as a emerging writer? How do you, like, do you draw pictures? Do you write journal entries? Like, how do you, as a young person, start to write?
All of the above. I filled infinity pages of writing and drawing, and then later less drawing, because turns out I'm not so good at it, and my sister's really good at it, and I was like, nope, just the words. And just like, you know, there's other forms of storytelling too. Like, I think I played a lot of like collaborative, like imaginary games with my friends when I was 7. When I was younger than 7, I used to just walk tables or circles around our dining room table and tell stories to anyone who would listen, which is embarrassing but true and paid off in the end. So however you're feeling like getting that story out, go for it. I don't really think there's a wrong way.
Yeah, no, I 100% agree with Rachel. And like remembering that telling is in the storytelling part, right? So then if you're talking it out, like that you're doing it, like that's it. Eventually you'll write it down, or if you're a person who likes to like literally write it down from the beginning, you can totally write it down from the beginning. In school, hold on, I'm a teacher, okay? So in school, if you have an assignment, you have a specific thing you have to do, please do it the specific way that your teacher asked you to do the thing.
Yeah, my answer
Okay.
was just for funsies.
Now, with that aside, when you're doing your stuff for fun, literally do it however you want to, because I know a lot of authors at this point, and I don't know any authors who do things exactly the same way. So there's no right way, that's number one. And number two is that every single book that you read, that's great. I promise you, the author has written 90,000 things that are mid, and even more that are terrible.
Including
right?
earlier versions of that book.
And it might even be the same one, exactly, right? And so then know that you're getting like the Instagram view when you pick up somebody's published book, right? There was a lot of grinding and sadness and many tries behind the thing. So if your try doesn't come out as polished as you would like, okay, nobody's did. I promise you, nobody's did. We just kept polishing it a little bit afterwards, okay? All right, so we're good.
Perfect answers, I think, and so good to be reminded. Marti and Rachel, thank you so much. So now we're going to welcome up our other 3 authors, and I am so excited about all of their perspectives. And I've got to say, Marti's note about drawing and writing, acts of art that are in dialogue with one another, put me so much to mind of Mia's work. And so, Mia, as I jump in, Affia in the World of Wonders introduces readers to a richly imagined world that's filled with adventure and gorgeous original illustrations. How did you approach world building to create a setting that feels both fantastical and relatable?
Thank you so much for that question. Can you guys hear me? Oh, thank you so much for that question.
Yeah.
I'm actually a first-time author. I've been doing art longer than I've been writing, so my world building starts visually. So I started this 12 years ago, and it's a reimagining of Alice in Wonderland. And originally, I was actually going to just be re-illustrating it with the fantasy world that I wanted to create. And growing up, most of the fantasy stories I loved were set in medieval European worlds, which I never questioned until I went to art school and took an African art history class and learned about West African kingdoms during medieval times that I had never learned about. And I couldn't believe it took that long to learn about. So it was, since 2007, I guess, this idea of creating a fantasy world set in that part of the world or inspired by it has just kind of never let me go. But it took 12 years just because I wanted to sort of create a fantasy version instead of trying to do something historical or something specific in that sense, and bring kind of my own fantasy flavor to it, and just my own, all the things that kind of make me an artist. And that's the thing, every artist and author that you meet has like a kaleidoscope of experiences, and just, my family's from Argentina, I have an identical twin. There's like all these things kind of come together to kind of filter our worldview and all the things we want to tell. So that's a very long roundabout answer of saying that all of that kind of went into my world building, but I also did a ton of research and just tried to be really intentional and loving about the way I designed this character's world. And at the end of the day, the best way to bring readers, I feel, into a world is through the characters. And so I just wanted to do enough visually and through the story to make those characters' emotional experiences make sense, and so that the arc of the story, the sister story that's at the core of it, could sort of have center stage. So there's just a lot of work. Actually, as the authors previously mentioned, that there's so much behind the scenes work that you don't see in the final product that's just getting you to the page or getting you to what you're writing to sort of set you up. And I don't know if I answered that
No,
correctly.
Mia, you answered it beautifully. And again, the reason I wanted to start with that is it took you 12 years, right?
Yeah.
It takes time to do any of this. And what you see in a published version is only the trying is the most important part. Adam, though, I'm really intrigued because you come at this from the perspective of a journalist, right, who became an author on this topic. In Luna and the Heart of the Forest, nature plays a significant role in that narrative. Does that come from sort of your journalistic background? And how do you integrate environmental themes into your storytelling, which we know it matters deeply to readers of this age, but also to readers generally?
So the irony is that at this stage, now I'm more of a teacher than a journalist, and I would say that the environmental settings in my books are more coming from my teaching.
Interesting.
I'm just gonna say that, it's funny you asked this because I was actually thinking about this answer, even though I didn't know the question, for a couple of days. I also had a bad fever for a couple of days, and so this answer might be kind of woo, but I'm just gonna go with it.
I'm excited for whatever you're about to say.
Cool, all right. So I teach humanities, mainly history, 9th grade, and I find also always do specifically what the assignment says, like Marty said. Anyway, part of what I teach world history as part of that, and one of the things I'm teaching, we're starting from the very beginning of human development, and one thing I teach is that human culture is created by stories. Culture is very much stories, what we tell ourselves about what we find is important, what is, how do we survive, how do we love, how do we commemorate things like death and celebration and coming together. And I think all of that culture derives very much from natural environment. I think when Rachel writes Rougarou Magic, I think that those bayous create a certain story. And I think desert people create a certain story. This book is set in the Canadian Atlantic, which is a very specific raw environment that I think creates a story. And I guess the woo part of it is that at a certain level, I think any kind of storytelling is kind of the world telling itself about itself. And that when you're tapping into it, you're tapping into that ability of the world to tell its story to itself. So sorry if I don't know, but
No, I love it. I love this idea of the myths that we carry in us, which are so much a part of the stories that many of you are telling. And Michelle, when I was digging into Darkness and Demon Song in particular, I was struck so much by the themes of courage, right? And this sort of universal feeling of when you're a young person and you have to face, when you're a person of any age, right? And you have to take on these challenges. How do you balance some of those darker elements with the hope and resilience to ensure a story resonates and empowers?
Yeah, y'all hear me? So I'm probably the spookiest person up here. Mine, I also write about rougarous like Rachel does, but mine is more traditional and awful and scary. But I actually recently wrote a blog post about why reading scary books is important. And the reason is that it allows young readers to test out their fear and their own courage in a safe place. Because books are safe. There's rules in books. And if it's, the rougarou can be defeated if you do this. You can't, as long as you have your flesh-eating mermaid best friend, she's in here, then you can go after a boo hag. You can do whatever you need to do to fight that monster. But in here there are rules. In the world there's not, and that's very terrifying. And I feel like scary books are a great place for kids to see that no matter how old you are, you can be courageous. And then, and if it gets too scary, you can shut the book. That's the biggest rule of all. And you can go back to it if you want. Or if you don't want. It's too scary, can't do M.R. Fournet's books. Cool, I'm glad you visited. But that's kind of how I feel. It's a place for kids to sort of test their mettle a little bit and understand that courage is at all ages.
I love that so much. And I will say one of the great joys of reading your books was when I was a young reader, there weren't a lot of scary books. There weren't things like Goosebumps, which I was a little baby sophisticate, so I thought that those were weak sauce, right? Yeah. So I tread into the world of Stephen King way too early, freaked myself out, right? You are doing something I think really important. And I just wanted to mention that. Thank you. So I do want to give you guys the opportunity to talk a little bit about how you build characters that feel honest. And you've touched on this a little in your answers, but as you look around this room today with these amazing young readers and writers, sort of how are you approaching this?
So again, they start visually for me. Like I have a picture in my head that I'm trying to capture, and at least with this book, because actually I'm finding in my next ideas I have a slightly different process. I'm actually trying to find what she looks like, and I know who she is now, which is interesting. But I'll talk about this story that it started out as a story I wanted to write to my twin sister as a way to reconnect with her after I left home. So that was kind of like the emotional core of the story. So it's, I guess the best way that I think about it is each character has an emotional piece of me, and then they kind of grow from there and become their own character. And to me, that's the most important thing that I learned from writing, is that what you had planned in the very beginning is in some ways kind of what ends up. There's a thread there, but it's so different too. And it's actually kind of empowering that I think to me the most empowering thing from the beginning is I didn't have the skills to make the book I envisioned when I started. And I thought I had to. I thought it had to be almost like a performance of my skill from the beginning. And some people are, at that level and of, proficiency, and they do sort of perform their work. But for those of us who are kind of new to it, it was very encouraging that I actually learned and grew as a writer along the way. And it's almost like my characters taught me a lot as well, and just letting them become their own people, and that's the most fun, and just seeing them visually. And well, let me say this. In my paintings before I wrote, I could only see my characters visually. So my favorite thing about writing was actually getting to hear their conversations, see their interactions, their conflicts, and their change, and all that stuff. It's kind of addicting actually right now.
That's awesome. I love the notion of like coming to recognize your character and then learning with them. What about you two?
So for me, I feel like when I started writing my book, or any manuscript I've written, I always start with place, and I feel like I often go too down the rabbit hole of place and plot, and my early critical feedback was develop your characters more. I think I did what I've heard from, the other panelists, is that I then just started taking real people and turning them into characters, And then there's also that kind of narcissism, which is just a big word for only thinking about yourself sometimes, of the narcissism of just putting myself into it. And or a self that I would have liked to have imagined myself. Like, I would have hoped my 11-year-old self was as brave as the character I made. And I see that more in my kids than myself. Like, I think that they're a better realization of that, but then they come out on the page and but then there's also villains too. And so then I just take people who I don't like, and I just read the news a little bit before that, and then they become characters.
That sounds like a very satisfying procese.
Sort of.
What about you, Michelle?
I don't have an answer that mimics you guys very much. It's weird. So these are my debut middle grade novels, but this is my 14th published book, and so there's probably, I don't know how many I've written. At this point, I don't look for my characters. They just sort of show up in my living room. They're like, "Hi, I'm Marius Gray." I'm like, "All right, I guess I'm writing your book now." And as I'm going, I will add things. It's like, but they come to me sort of fully formed. And I know that's awful for me to try to explain this to anybody who's trying to write a book. They're like, "But how?" I'm like, "I don't know. He showed up in my bathroom. I was trying to towel off my hair, and there he is." That's all I've got. I add stuff as I go, and I do take pieces of people that I know. I never really write somebody verbatim. And like in this one, we have an autistic character. My son is autistic. Is the character in here exactly like my son? Absolutely not. But I took little pieces of him and little pieces of other autistic kids I know, and I put it in there because I always want to represent anybody I'm writing in a completely three-dimensional way so that you feel that character. You feel like they're a whole person. And I think a lot of times people don't with neurodivergent characters. People already have preconceived notions about what those characters should be. And so I try to challenge that so that you can really get to know what an autistic person is like, and not just, "Oh, I watched The Big Bang Theory. I know exactly what that is." So that's kind of where I come up with it.
I think that's a terrific point. Do you think that, I'm just going to ask this question, and it's not one I put in, but I'm just curious, and I'm curious the entire group. Does it get easier as you go, right? You described writing 14 books, and now the characters are appearing. Is the practice the thing, for young writers in the audience? Is it just how do you sort of take on the challenge of writing, and finishing?
Yeah. But I feel like the hardest thing for me for writing is just life, like work and bills and practices and so I think if I have the time, yes, it does make it easier if you have the time.
Yeah.
Carving out the time's the tough part.
There's not enough time for anything most of the
Nope.
time.
No, in fact, I'm what I call a binge writer. We have pantsers and we have plotters. That's what writers say. You're either flying by the seat of your pants or you plotted it out. I do an outline to plot it all out so that I can just rip through it. And because I'm so busy, I'm like, okay, I got a week, and I can really, and I wrote Marius, this Brick, Dust, and Bones, in 8 days, but that's my record.
Wow.
And that's a terrible first draft. But if you get it all out as fast as possible, you can go back and fix it, because it's terrible. But you can't edit a blank page. You can edit a really terrible story.
Love that piece of advice. So why did you choose to write a middle grade story?
I actually didn't think of the audience's age. Actually, when I was writing this, I was just writing what I felt like I could, and it's almost like. But I guess what I'm thinking about is similar to Marty and Rachel's answers earlier. That actually all my favorite books growing up were middle grade, and I absolutely love fantasy. So it kind of like I was just sort of just writing, I guess, the way that I wanted to write, and then just it sort of. But I guess to your question about style, sorry to kind of put two together. I guess I thought about all the fairy tales and kind of myths and things like that were very that feel they're from a different world. I really when I was growing up, I really liked escapist stories that took me out of my day-to-day reality and kind of helped me just get a break, And that's kind of where I took it, basically.
Yeah, in terms of your book, the thing I was struck by was, is it because Alice in Wonderland is one of those quintessential, again, and to the point that's been made, and I tend to agree with it, some of the most forceful stories, the ones that live in my mind full time, forever, were books I read at that age.
Yeah.
Do you think that drove part of your process here?
Yeah, absolutely. And it's interesting. I wouldn't have think of Alice in Wonderland as a middle grade book, but yeah, I guess it is if it was published today. But it is one of those books that it meant something to me when I was that age, and it means something different to me every time I read it as an adult. So I guess I was just trying to write something in that same vein.
That's awesome.
I piggyback on that. I mean, I agree. Like the stories I read back then are the stories that kind of wrote themselves in kind of white hot fire on my brain, right? And they're still the ones I remember. One of the other authors said like you don't want to necessarily give someone nightmares, but I kind of do want to give kids nightmares. Well, in as much as like, if we're talking about, or I talked about earlier about like stories create culture, I also think particularly the stories you get now at this developmental age, that's how you create your concept of what is heroism and what is villainy and what is bravery. Like those foundational virtues, kind of, like they are created by the stories that you receive. And so I don't know, I love reading adult literature, but like I think that is so much, it kind of sounds weird to say, like I really want to form a kid's brain, but I do in a way. Like I know that the story hits that much deeper, and that's, I think, why, yeah.
Yeah, when you were having your answer earlier, I couldn't help but think about archetypes, right?
Yeah,
and again,
exactly.
The pieces of culture and communication, and there's just a moment where you're maybe more open to some of that too, and that's part of where it hits harder. Yeah. Michelle?
Well, they said all the things I was going to say. I mean, if you think about it, people often discount middle grade, but if you think about some of the biggest money-making franchises we've had, Harry Potter, the first several books are considered middle grade. Percy Jackson, all of those, huge hits and stick with you forever. And it's only recently that we started categorizing these books by the age of the protagonist. And that's a recent thing. To Kill a Mockingbird would be considered a middle grade book today, but is that lesser literature?
Absolutely not.
It's not.
I love those answers. So we do have a little bit of time because we have saved this space. Do we have any questions for our amazing panel? And you can ask a second question if you asked a first. Oh, we got a hand.
Yep. It's your boy.
He forgot.
We had somebody back there.
Oh, we got a question in the middle. I'll repeat it too. So I'm going to repeat the question, and I'm going to do my best to capture this. Her question is basically, how do you make these choices in terms of characterization, characters, virtues, what you're trying to communicate, which to the point that Marti made earlier of you get to get 3 qualities in, right? And then you rely on the reader to enliven, I think is a great question.
All right, so I'm going to say, well, first of all, the person asking the question is also a pretty great writer, and it's Greta Heyer. We were in UNO fiction together, so I feel like, I don't know, as a 9th grade teacher, I will often complain about how brittle my kids can be, but really, at the end of the day, I think kids are a lot more resilient than we give them credit for, and I think, and maybe that all goes back to go into woo territory again. Like when you're talking about like the being receptive to what you're reading, I think like the soft state where you can be receptive also is an adaptive state that allows for resilience. Like resilience is much more about being water than it is about being tough. When you're tough, like you snap, you know what I mean?
Yep.
And like the ability to bend around things. So, sorry, now I'm gonna, anyway, like there is the like, so I think that the virtues I'm picking, I don't know, I don't actually think that they're that specific even to this time and place. I think that like being brave and being kind and being empathetic, like those are universal things, and I actually think that they're much more present in storytelling from way back in the day than they are now. I actually, you know, I think humans have always valued that. Like I was just doing Canterbury Tales with my high school kids, and I actually think a lot of it is in there, like, you know, in Chaucer at the beginning of the English language. But yeah, I do think that kid readers are super resilient and can take like tough themes because they're figuring out how to navigate those themes as they grow up. And yeah, I think we sometimes don't give them enough credit, and to go off on a slight rant, I think sometimes that's why like our genre of middle grade or YA does get dismissed sometimes, is that they think like the themes can't be there, but I actually think that that's to their detriment, and I think that's weirdly like an ahistorical place to come from, because when you look at old folk tales and fairy tales, they have blood, you know?
Yes.
And like, so that's
a lot of it.
Yeah.
I guess in terms of decisions, like I'm going to talk about this from the story perspective. I feel like I always start out knowing how my story is going to end. So where I want the story to end emotionally and where I want my character to go. And that helps me anytime but that's the thing with art, you're just making decisions. And I tend to overthink my decisions, like, oh, what happens if I make the wrong choice? And if you make the wrong choice, you could just choose another one. And as long as you use that compass of where you want your character to go. But also for me, my work, when I was younger, my work was all about self-expression, about me. But as I gotten older and the more experiences I've had, you know, working retail, waiting tables, kind of being that fly on the wall, meeting people, observing people, I realized that actually what's more important to me is actually connecting with other people, and not necessarily the people of my own background either. So it's just trying to, for me, it's the decisions of like, how do I convey what deeply matters to me? And especially a process like this, it took 12 years, what mattered to me throughout that entire timeline. But also always thinking about what I want to say to my audience, like how do I want to connect to other people at any time in my life? So, yeah.
Great answer.
Coming from someone who did write adult and young adult, I don't write my middle grade any different. I write it the same. I make sure that I don't have a moral to the story, because kids aren't dumb. They can critically think. And so I want to provide them with a grown-up story. Now, I cut out some of the stuff I would put in the adult books so that it's age appropriate, obviously, but I don't ever want to give them, okay, this happened, and the moral of the story, that's for picture books. That's not for middle grade. I respect my readers. They're smart. And so I leave it open so that they can critically think and draw their own conclusions and decide how they feel about it.
Wonderful answer too. Do we have time for one more question?
Yeah, this is a selfish question because I work for Scholastic, which is a book publisher, and I'm curious from the author's perspective. You know, all kids are different, and you as teachers, like, how do you're all talking about the books that you grew up with and read, but how do you introduce children to your books? Like, what would you want your readers to understand, and what are ways, either in the classroom or out and about, how do you, talk to a child, like, to convince them that they might be interested in opening your book?
Great question. Hit it, guys.
I guess I'll go. I have a very easy way. I say, hey, do you like spooky books? And they go, yeah. But it's with our genre, it's also harder marketing and getting to talk to the kids because there's gatekeepers, as there should be. But it's one of the few genres of books that you can't directly market to the kids. You have to go through teachers, you have to go through librarians, you must go through parents, and sometimes parents decide what their kids should and shouldn't want to read, and it's not always what the kid wants to read. But in those beautiful moments when I get to go to a library or I get to go to a classroom or whatever, it's my favorite because the kids have more questions and are so excited, and that's what I really like to talk to. And it's always like, hey, I'm here because I like to scare you. You want to ask me some questions? And there's always a lot of questions after that. So.
Awesome. I kind of have an easy way too because mine's with my art. Like this book is fully illustrated, so it's got 30 acrylic paintings, 20 pencil drawings. So my hope with this book was, I hope you come for the art, but stay for the story. So, and that was actually really hard because, again, I'm such a passionate reader. So to me, I just tried to do the most justice I could to the story aspect of it. But yeah, I think that, actually, yesterday was my first time talking in front of 109-year-olds, and it was so inspiring. I was terrified at first because it was the first time for everything, right? It's really scary, but it was so inspiring seeing how passionate they were about art, and especially today. Like, I think I just want to connect with kids that still have that creative spark, and encourage that, because I think that, again, with everything going on with technology and stuff, not to get too much on that deep end, but people are just kind of losing the incentive to keep creating their own things, whether it's stories or art. And any way I can, get kids to keep that passion alive is what I'm really into. So.
Yeah, I think like I'm doing the same things probably everyone else does, like going to the library readings, the school readings, and things like that. I think for any kind of book, like, I try and relate it to like their lives now, or I try and like talk about things that are kind of like, this is like my journalism instinct to like take like the most quote unquote exciting parts and sell it that way. So when I have my students read the Ramayana, I'm like, okay, this is a story about a guy who leads an army of monkeys against a demon. Like, that sounds fun, right? And then that's a little bit of you lay out that sugar. Or the other thing I try and do is, like, my daughter now, she knows when my wife and I are talking about something that she's not supposed to be listening in on, and she's always going to ask, like, what are you guys talking about? Mm-hmm. So I try and like present, particularly with my book, present it as something that maybe you shouldn't know about, so that to spark that curiosity, because I think like every kid craves to know what's going on behind the door, and I think that's like, and I think that they should, be curious about that, and that's, yeah.
Yeah, I keep hoping that I get banned. I'm like, please somebody ban me. Because when you ban a book, it's like if someone just bought on your behalf a giant blazing arrow that's like, don't read this. And then, yeah, of course, that makes everybody want to read it. So if anybody out there is getting ban happy, please ban my books. That'd be great.
Yeah.
Well, this was just an amazing conversation. I want to say thank you once again to all of our amazing authors.